Hi, I'm Alison Kadlec. I am the last thing standing between you and the weekend. I said, could you please make me go after lunch, because that's when everybody is really cheerful. But if you could make it so that I'm both after lunch and the very last thing between you and your weekend, that would be ideal. So here we are. I got what I wanted. Thank you guys very much for that. I'm going to go very quickly through this stuff and give you basically an overview of what we have learned, sort of lessons learned from stakeholder engagement in hundreds of colleges and through our experience with CBD. So this is drawing on broader experience in a number of issue areas, but particularly our work in CBD. So I will, a lot of the stuff that I'm going to tell you, you guys are going to say, yeah, that actually rings true. I know that, or I intuitively know that. And so I urge you to think about how what you know matches up with what you do and what other people do at your campuses, because I think that this is one of the things that's most difficult about stakeholder engagement. We've heard it a lot that this is about culture change, and it is, but culture change is not some big amorphous thing out there. Cultures are the product of discrete practices, habits of communication, things like that. And so as we think about effective stakeholder engagement, particularly faculty, staff, institutional stakeholder engagement, I want you guys to try to think about, if you have any energy, brain energy left at the end of this, to think about how these principles actually match up with the kinds of things that you do. So now what? You guys actually talked about this at lunch, or right before lunch with Isaac. He got the other good spot. He kept you from the food. So, and the things that you talked about were things like faculty buy-in, initiative fatigue, making the case about the return on investment in the absence of definitive evidence, resources, time, funding, and prioritizing, right? These are the kinds of things that you talked about. The flip side of this question is, what are the opportunities that we have? I think I've heard a lot of you say in the breakouts and in informal conversations that a lot of these ideas and a lot of what you've learned are consistent with the student success efforts that you have underway, right? And so it's about thinking about how these ideas and how these practices and how the design principles fit in with some of the things that you're already doing. So when you think about the challenges, I want you to think about also the opportunities that you have in front of you. When we talk about faculty buy-in, because a lot of what I'm going to be talking about here is faculty engagement, faculty and staff engagement, I just want to, and I told Rob I wouldn't do this, but I am going to do this, that I have a little bit of when I hear buy-in, it's useful shorthand, but what you really need, and you guys know this because I've heard it in every session that I have been in every conversation, that what you're actually looking for is a sense of shared ownership for the work. And buy-in has limitations as shorthand for that, but it is useful shorthand. But when I say buy-in, or when we talk about buy-in, I'm really thinking about, what are the conditions under which faculty and staff at all levels become meaningful co-owners of the work that you're trying to do. Okay, so let's actually start with business as usual. So this is business as usual. If you can't read this, it says, we want to include you in this decision without letting you affect it. This is what most people experience as engagement, right? And to be honest, most of you have actually been in both of those roles, right? So you both know what it's like to be the guy who's like, you know what, we need to get this done, so what box do I need to check to say that I have consulted with you? And you have also been the person who has been called in for empty gesture, box checking engagement that doesn't actually amount to anything because the decisions have already been made. So this is business as usual. This is actually why it's so hard to engage faculty and staff in a meaningful way, because this is most people's experience with stakeholder engagement. Lesson learned. There are no easy answers. So most complex problems and the changes they entail are more about values and collective decision-making under conditions of uncertainty and less about implementing a clearly defined fix. So Ron Heifetz makes an interesting and important distinction between technical leadership and adaptive leadership, between technical problems and adaptive problems. Are any of you Heifetz fans out here? 0 Heifetz fans. All right, well, you don't have to read it because this is what it's about. That technical problems are problems that are easy to identify. They lend themselves to cut and dried solutions. They can be solved by experts, and they can be implemented by edict, essentially. So a lot of technical problems are rather simple problems. Adaptive problems, the problems that are facing you guys as you seek to do this work, are problems where it's actually difficult to identify what the core of the problems are that you need to address, because you're looking at wholesale systems change. And in fact, it's actually very easy to deny the existence of problems, of adaptive problems. Solving adaptive problems requires changes in values, beliefs, roles, relationships, and workflow and habits of work. People at all levels of adaptive problems need to be meaningfully involved in both naming the problems and identifying the solutions. They can't simply be solved by experts from outside. And they can't be solved by edict, right? They can't simply be implemented by fiat. They actually have to be implemented by the people who are closest to students who are experiencing the issues, right? So, lesson learned, people, not ideas, make or break it. So the human side of change is absolutely critical. If you look across a range of research fields at innovation, how innovation does and doesn't happen, most failures of innovation are actually failures of implementation. And most failures of implementation have to do with lack of attention to the human beings that are involved, that have to make different kinds of decisions, that have to think differently, act differently, work differently. And so the human side of change is absolutely critical. I think there's nothing there, it is not an overstatement to say that not even the best and most carefully crafted policies are going to be successfully implemented or sustained over time. There is no such thing in this world as, in this kind of decision-making world, as the force of the good idea being good enough, right? And so this is a matter of what are the conditions under which people are actually working and how do they make sense of the problems that they're experiencing. Your own worst enemy is often you. And this is something that we see again and again, that leaders have a tendency to throw lots of unnecessary obstacles in their own path. This work is hard enough. It is tremendously difficult work. And the kinds of obstacles that people most commonly throw in their own path are things like clumsy communication, empty gesture consultation, over-reliance on top-down decision-making when implementation is actually going to depend on people at multiple levels and at lower levels. And the tendency to use data to bludgeon rather than engage. And so Rob has talked a great deal about that, and I urge you guys to continue to engage Rob and also to look into the work that he does around creating cultures, healthy cultures of inquiry. Lesson learned, taking the time pays off. We often hear from leaders that we work with or folks at various levels that we don't have the time. We got to get this done. These are great ideas. We know what we need to do, and we just need to get it done. And our general rule in this is you don't actually have the time not to dedicate to authentic, ongoing, early, meaningful engagement of stakeholders at every level, because it takes a lot less time to do it right than it takes to get things back on track after you've lost people's trust, or after you have, or after people have who are resistant to what you're trying to do. Regardless of the greatness of the ideas and their commitment to student success, after those individuals have registered their resistance. And as most of you know, hostile faculty and staff do not need to be particularly well organized in their resistance in order to derail your efforts. There's an awful lot that can be done by sitting on one's hands. There's lots of forms of non-compliance. And so it's really important to keep in mind that without a strong sense of shared ownership, you won't actually, so it's not just about clearing the path for what you want to do, it's also about the necessity of a shared sense of ownership for actually coming up with the best solutions and actually finding ways to implement them meaningfully. You guys got a lot of general principles here. Davis says this, Rob says this. Other folks say this. These are kind of guiding principles. Here's some compelling data. Here are the kinds of things that we think we know. But when it comes right down to it, it's about the relationships and the patterns of communication at your campuses. Somebody said in one of the comments, you know, one of our big challenges is this is the way we've always done it, right? And that kind of inertia, that kind of challenge really requires that you attend carefully to these issues of meaningful engagement. So I'll tell you a little bit more about what that actually looks like and entails as I roll through this. Okay, lesson learned. Focus on conditions, not personalities. This is something that is so well established in social science research that it has a name. It's called the fundamental attribution error. We tend to overemphasize personality traits in making sense of a problem and underestimate the importance of conditions and contexts. Anybody who is married or is in any kind of meaningful relation with any other human being knows that you cannot change people, right? If you think you can, does anybody think you can? I want to know. Talk to me afterwards if you think you can. So you can't change people, but you can tweak circumstances. And if you change conditions, you can elicit different kinds of behaviors. You can elicit different possibilities. I think the biggest point here is that you miss a huge range of opportunities when you get hung up on the things that are easiest to get hung up on. That jackass is like that. He's just like that. And no matter what we do, he's going to be like that, and she's going to be like that. And it's probably true. It's not helpful, right? So thinking about the conditions under which people work and operate and thinking about how rigorous attention to those contexts can give you kind of wiggle room or space to create, to tweak things, to create different kinds of reactions. So one thing to focus here, so Rob talks about red light, yellow light, green light. One of the ways that I think about this is that you have, give or take 5 to 10% of your faculty and staff who under no circumstances are going to be okay with anything that happens. I don't know if any of you are Marx Brothers fans, but in Horse Feathers, the opening number, he is a professor, and he is singing whatever it is, I'm against it. And there is some percentage of your faculty or staff that's just simply how it's going to be for whatever reason. There is some percentage of your faculty who are green lighters. They're going to be on board, they're going to be with you, they're going to be gung-ho, they're willing to roll up their sleeves until you burn them out, and you guys have talked about that as well, through over-reliance on their green-lightedness, that will be with you. Now, the yellow light folks, and these are the people that I think are the most important people to focus on, and I think of them as thoughtful skeptics. They're thoughtful because they're deeply committed to the work. They're skeptical because they have seen so many things come and go, right? They're skeptical because they're exhausted. They're skeptical. A faculty member at a college in Oregon said, I'm like a starfish. I cling to a rock, and I don't know if I have a head, but I guess it's somewhere in the middle, and I keep it down, and the tide comes in, and the tide goes out, and I just cling to the rock. And the tide is whatever new initiative is coming, and this too shall pass. And so as long as I can just keep my suction cups attached to the rock, this too shall pass, no matter how good an idea it is. So I think of the starfish faculty member, and this is not, again, when you think about personalities, you can say, oh, that damn starfish, no brain, no head, no eyes, actually I have no idea what starfish anatomy is about, but I assume they have some of those things, right? I don't actually even know where I'm taking this analogy, so I'm just going to go to the next slide. All right. Anybody want to extend that out for me? All right, good. All right. Right. Okay, lesson learned. Own your power. Most people dramatically underestimate their ability to make things better. They also, the flip side of that is they underestimate their ability to make things worse. So this goes back to clumsy communication and empty engagement and all of these things. But I think because what you're looking at is really good ideas and things that you're deeply committed to with respect to your students and what you want to accomplish and these kinds of things, it's very easy to just want the information or the ideas to speak for themselves, to have the force of what you're trying to do be good enough. And it is absolutely critical to keep students at the center of every conversation, which is why some of the resources that we've produced are about supporting colleges as they elicit and bring student voice into the work that they're doing, because it's absolutely critical for framing the conversation. But as you look at the things that you're trying to accomplish, it's really, really easy to overlook the attention to the kinds of human pieces of the puzzle that really do amount to the culture change that is essential to the work that you're trying to accomplish. Again, technical fixes, easy answers, these are the kinds of things that you seek at your own peril. I find it, when I hear somebody say, and I hear it a lot, this isn't rocket science, that sets off alarm bells for me. Because the fact is, it should be so easy as rocket science, because rocket science is a science, and there's a formula, and at the end of this formula, either your rocket launches or it doesn't, and you can figure out why, and then you can go back to the drawing board. This is actually much more complicated than rocket science because it's about human beings, right? It's sort of the difference between Atul Gawande, I don't know how many Gawande fans we have here, but he talks about different kinds of problems and different kinds of learning. And he says, okay, consider rocket science and making a rocket launch. Now consider raising a kid. So parenting, rocket science. We should be so lucky that parenting was rocket science. This is the kind of change that you guys are trying to affect is of this much more complicated variety. So and we have a natural tendency to look for technical fixes and easy answers because it's natural and because the ideas are so good. And sometimes the data it's just so there for you, right? Not in all cases, but in some cases. And so I would urge you to resist the temptation to look for technical fixes and easy answers. All right. Lesson learned. Be strategic and respectful of people's time. This actually seems sort of like a contradiction, but it is not. Not every stakeholder needs to be engaged on every issue, but careful design and implementation of change should include systematic consideration of who to engage at what point. Somebody talked about the challenge of prioritizing, and also, when Isaac was asking, so what's next? And somebody said, you mean like when we get back? Monday? That kind of next? Yeah, that kind of next, right? And so as you think about the critical stakeholders to engage, who are the people that you're going to be depending on to actually implement these things? However far down that goes, that's who you need to be engaging. Do you need to be engaging them all at once at the same time? No. But you should be thinking about who and in what order and at what depth. Part of this is about being respectful of people's busy schedules and about respectful of the fact that people are suffering from initiative fatigue. It's also a strategy, if you're thinking very carefully about who to engage and when, one of the things that you should be thinking about is how to empower your green lighters, but to protect them so that you don't burn them out, right? And I know that this is a particular challenge for smaller colleges. How do you take your green lighters? How do you build their capacity to extend their influence to some of the yellow lighters and bring some yellow lighters into the green light zone? And so this is the kind of thing that as you think about the work that you're doing, as you're designing your teams and thinking about what's next, thinking about strategy in terms of protecting people's time and protecting the most precious resource that you have in terms of your staff. Lesson learned, the devil is in the details. This is actually, I think this is the last one on my list here. This is the most important practical lesson that we have learned in work in, 20 states, hundreds of institutions, thousands of faculty and staff at this point. These things that seem incredibly mundane, these are the things that will make or break it. And they include things like getting the right people to the table at the right time, framing the issues for inquiry, for deliberation, framing them properly, and skillful facilitation. And you can't just do one and you can't just do two. You have to do all of them because you can have great ideas, the right people at the table. You can have even the really nicely framed discussion guides and things like that. If you have poor facilitation, you're dead in the water. And I have to say, in our experience, and I know that Isaac can attest to this as well, that a lot of people who consider themselves excellent facilitators are not. And a lot of people, and here's one little, I think there's not a lot, I don't know if there's a recipe for this, but there is one thing that I hear regularly that makes me think, wait a minute. And that is, oh, I'm a great teacher, or she's a great teacher, she'll be a great facilitator. No, often that is not the case, because the job of a facilitator is to actually make it possible for other voices to be heard, for other people's expertise to be surfaced. And so that's very different. That's a very different kind of role than a discussion leader in a classroom, right? Now, I'm going to show you guys at the end here a set of resources that we produced. We're so serious about these mundane details that we have produced a number of tools that don't use themselves, just like data don't speak for themselves. But they're things that are designed to support your capacity. Skillful facilitation, there are some people who are just born facilitators, but very few of those. And in fact, skillful facilitation is the product of practice and work. And there are things that you can do to build your own capacity to do it. We have created a facilitator handbook, and in it there is a self-assessment matrix that actually our team uses regularly. And I revisit the matrix before I facilitate things, just to check myself again about the things that I'm really good at, the things I'm not so good at, the things that I struggle with, and what I really need to be attentive to in whatever conversation is coming up next. So these kinds of attention to mundane details cannot be overemphasized because it is so disheartening to watch really great ideas die 1,000 unnecessary deaths, right? And so this is why you pay attention to this stuff, you have a much better chance of getting where you want to be in terms of broad shared ownership and real sustainable progress. Oh, okay, so I'm gonna wrap up with a rundown of the biggest challenges and leading recommendations when it comes to pathway design, and then I'm gonna tell you a little bit about the resources and then answer questions that you have. Okay, so you guys have talked about this. I've heard this in the sessions. We've heard this all over the place. These are the big challenges when it comes to stakeholder engagement, faculty, staff engagement. And when I say faculty engagement, we mean all the way down, rank and file faculty, adjunct faculty, staff at every level. The places that are closest to students are the places where implementation is or isn't going to happen meaningfully. So lack of authenticity, that goes back to the slide about empty gesture engagement. Leadership buy-in. Well, we'll talk about all these. Poorly structured meetings. How many of you have participated in poorly structured meetings? Really? Come on. So no, oh, wait, you're probably sitting with the people that structured your meetings. All right. You guys are doing a great job. You've got this all figured out. All right. Initiative overload. We've heard a lot about it. Resistance to mandates. Nobody likes to be told what to do, even if it's the right thing to do. A lot of it has to do with how you're told to do it. Heavy workloads, ridiculously heavy workloads. How many of you have 3 or more roles? Right, okay. That's almost, that was a lot of hands. It's so sad your hands didn't even go up very high. But yes, there were a lot of hands. And fear of change. So let me go through what we think are some potential solutions. So purposeful engagement, and this goes back to, I'm going to, again, at the end here, share with you a set of resources that include kind of the most mundane, nuts and bolts kinds of practices. Meaningful, authentic engagement that's actually designed to create a sense of shared ownership at multiple levels. There are lots of ways. People can live with things that they don't like. People do not like to be BS'd, and we know when we're being BS'd. Did you notice, Isaac, I didn't swear? You can tell Will. Leadership buy-in. Oh my God, get on the same page already. So it doesn't matter if you've got buy-in or engagement at multiple levels. If the leadership of your college is not on the same page about commitment to this work, it doesn't matter. It's so demoralizing at the level of practice where there is. And so taking the time and figuring out strategies to ensure that your leadership is in fact on the same page is incredibly important. Being able to identify when your leadership is not on the same page is the first step in that, and that's critical. Poorly structured meetings, quality facilitation, goal and role clarity. We have posted, and it'll be available on Moodle, a bunch of kinds of materials to support this stuff. We've also created, for the 1.0 colleges, hundreds of actual meeting agendas and discussion guides as they were needed by folks. And so feel free to contact us if you need help, if you're heading into something dreadful and you need help with thinking about how to structure meetings and how to make sure that they actually accomplish what you want them to do. But goal and role clarity and quality facilitation are, I would say, the 2 make or break it things. Initiative overload. Fundamental restructuring and tying what you're doing to the mission. So there was a college, it's not a CBD college, in Arizona that shall remain nameless, Maricopa. And I was doing some work there on something else, outcomes-based funding or something. And they had taken, one of the colleges had taken it upon themselves to count the number of not minor initiatives or student success initiatives, but major initiatives. And they came up with a number of 25 major initiatives. And so one of our top recommendations to them moving out of this was, if you could streamline those, see which ones are still alive, see which ones are aligned with your mission, and get those down to 5 or get those down to 3, and then decide if this thing that you're asking us to do actually fits anymore, that's probably the place to start, right? And so really thinking about how these pieces fit together, and this is why leadership being on the same page is so critical, because there are endless initiatives and there's endless competing work for your attention. But there are ways to fundamentally think about how these things fit together and to do it, and it's absolutely critical to do it. Resistance to mandates, collaborative pathway design. This stuff does not happen by fiat. It doesn't happen by edict. It happens through collaborative work. And it's not simply that people are resistant to mandates. It's that mandates typically don't have the results that you want them to have because you're actually depending on people to implement them. So you need to meaningfully include those people in the conversations. And again, if you think you don't have the time to do it, you don't have the time not to do it. Heavy workloads, respect and recognition. Find ways to respect people's times. If you can avoid creating a new meeting, what a lovely thing. If you can tie agendas together for different kinds of meetings to make it so that you minimize the asks that you're making on people and you can sort of streamline the work, it's a great thing. And this requires just sometimes just a little bit of attention to what are the 10 meetings you have to be at this week? What are the goals of those meetings? How do those things fit together? Again, this goes back to also having some sense of how the different priorities at work in your institution fit together. That way you can identify the opportunities that you can seize to actually tie things together. And recognition for people's time. Now, recognition comes in lots of forms, and it's not simply about, some people feel recognition in terms of money or time. Some people, recognition is actually also formal recognition of people's efforts, right? That aren't tied to those kinds of tangible benefits. Fear of change. I'm sorry to report that fear of change, that the only thing to do here is to be honest and clear about what's going to be really hard. This was Isaac mentioned this before lunch, that we've watched colleges get to a place where they've said, oh, wow, this is going to be hard because it's going to require that we rethink job descriptions. And we were in the breakouts I was in today listening to the conversations about honest recognition of the fact that not every class may be getting taught as frequently as faculty would like. In some places, those classes that are not part of or aligned with the pathway redesign are not being taught. In other places, they're being made electives. But what's important is that there needs to be honest recognition of what's going to be difficult. One of the takeaways here, and one of the things that we hear again and again, is my input wasn't included. My input wasn't included. We were actually in a situation with a CVD college, not in this state, in another state, which actually will remain nameless, where people, where we worked with collaborative teams to design, on it doesn't matter what, on specific pieces of the work. And then a year later, 6 months later, they were showed the results of this work, and they said, where the hell did this come from? Like another top-down, and we said, well, this was actually what you guys did. And they're like, oh, well, it's pretty good, And it's not that people don't, so again, to give people credit, it's not that human beings are, whatever conclusion you would draw about them. There's a very long history of having their input not included. There's a very long history in most places of empty engagement, right? And so this idea, and I know you were saying, that you have had to be redundant, and to you it sounds obvious. We absolutely recommend again and again and again, this is what you said, this is how we're using it. This is what we didn't, these were some of your ideas that we didn't adopt, and here's why, right? Again, people can live with things that they don't want, but they need to know how they were included. Finding ways to communicate back, multiple channels of communicating back. Again, positive redundancy all over the place in this is absolutely critical because it takes a long time for people to genuinely believe that their input is being meaningfully included, largely because of long histories that they have with contrary experience, right? So that's extremely important. I want to pause for a minute by showing you it's only what fits on one slide. So I've been asking people for the last few weeks, what makes a good team? And what are good teams that you've been on or bad teams that you've been on? And so I've gotten some input from people. This is about all kinds of teams. I heard from somebody who was talking about a good and bad team, whitewater rafting. I've heard about lacrosse teams. I've heard about work teams. I've heard about PTAs. I've looked at the teams that I'm on, the ones that are not so high functioning and the ones that are higher functioning, and thinking about what makes a good team. So this is just what fits on one slide, and I'm sure I'm missing all sorts of things. But members of healthy teams have a clear understanding of the team's goals and what they bring to the table. Somebody said early wins. And how do you think about both nearer term and longer term goals and setting your team up to both to execute work where you can experience early wins? That's critical. Members of healthy teams see a strong connection between their personal commitments and team goals, right? Between their personal identities, their values, and the goals of the team or the goals of the work. They understand how the work of the team fits with other institutional priorities. This is why it's so important to streamline the many initiatives. And this is what initiative fatigue does to people, right? It makes it very hard to see how things fit together. And it makes it very easy to say, this too shall pass. Members of healthy teams, they feel respected, heard, valued by their departments, their institutional leaders, and each other. And they feel that way because they are. I mean, so, and part of that is practicing demonstrating respect. There is a fake it till you make it element here with people that you genuinely dislike that you have to work with, right? But, there are practices that demonstrate respect to other people. And it's the things that you want from people. And it's extremely important to practice those things and to make those things real. And members of healthy teams believe that they have the support and guidance to be successful in their work. They actually believe that it's possible to achieve what they're being asked to achieve. And they're given the support that they need. Nobody is going to get the time, all the time and the money that they need. But there are limits, as you guys said, to what you can ask of people without providing resources, without providing enough space and time. And Rob hits this note again and again, space and time to do the work, right? There's something that it's only because it didn't fit here that I didn't include it, but there's one other thing that was a cross-cutting theme, whether it was rafting teams or PTAs or college work teams. Members of healthy teams talk about having fun. They actually talk about laughing and having a good time. And that might seem very minor and insignificant and grim at this point in the day and all of that, but it actually is critical to find ways to tap into and to celebrate the things that are fun about your work, all right? All right, so where are we? Oh, this is great, okay. We're almost there. This is in fact the last slide. All right, so these are the resources. These are gonna go up on the Moodle site. These are also hot links, and so I guess when they get to where they are, you can link on them. The Engaging Faculty During Student Pathways implementation is a guide to thinking about how faculty engagement works, the do's and don'ts. It's very practical, hands-on kind of thing. Student Focus Group Resource Guide, because so many of you have talked about the critical importance of the focus on students, of the student experience in this, and also because, again, this is facilitation. A lot of people think, well, we do focus groups with students. We know how to do that. We know what students think. We know what we're doing. Other people think, it'd be really awesome to have a kind of plug and play, kind of here are the things that you do when you're setting up a group. Here's how you recruit students. Here are the things you need to keep in mind. Here are the things that you can provide to make this actually meaningful to students themselves so that they also get something out of it, right? Here are the things that there's also in that is a sample protocol. So actually questions if you want to do kind of a diagnostic on the experience of the student pathway from students' perspectives. So there's that. An internal stakeholder engagement workshop toolkit. That is the sexiest name we could come up with. And it's great. We call it, what? iSuit? Isn't that great? It just rolls off the tongue. That's actually deep nuts and bolts. How do you get the 5 kinds of critical internal stakeholders to the table? What do you do when you have them there? How do you structure it? How do you think about it? Isaac, jump in if there's anything you want to add about any of these things. Okay. The Completion by Design Facilitator's Handbook. This is, it's a long thing, but it's actually lots and lots of very specific practical advice about how to facilitate difficult conversations. One of the things that's most useful to do in building the capacity of an institution to kind of carry this work on and forward is to help your green lighters, to train up your green lighters, to make more green lighters, to reach out and have communication, really constructive and very difficult conversations with yellow lighters, essentially. And so building the capacity of the people that are there. And in fact, we've also found that some of the best facilitators are not among the green lighters. They're actually among the yellow lighters. They are not among the red lighters, by the way. Again, I don't think you need to worry about those people. But training people to be really effective facilitators is both a way to kind of empower folks and to really practice the cultivation of shared ownership for the work. It's something you can do, and it's something that's worth taking the time to do. And then student voices on the pathway to completion. It's 2 reports and a video that you can use. It's very useful. You guys saw yesterday videos that were produced here of student voices, as well as it's sort of a kind of student account of the experience of the pathway. So these are the kinds of things that are available that you should feel free to use. Again, we have lots and lots of other kinds of resources. Feel free to contact Isaac or me. If you've met Monica, grab her card and reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to help you guys out and to offer any assistance that we can.